Cool. So I want to welcome everybody. Our topic for tonight is online trajectories. So I think everyone knows what our administrators will come up with before. What we want to talk about tonight is hear from speakers about how we can Okay, am I back in now? My internet just cut out. All right, let's try this instead. Give me one second. I'm going to try to switch over to another microphone.
I think it's an internet connectivity issue. You might want to call in on your phone.
Or you can turn off your webcam to free up a little bandwidth.
Yeah, that's true too. All right, I'll just turn that off. There we go. I recently learned it's actually apparently etiquette now to turn off your webcam if it's not necessary, since then it's hogging everybody else's bandwidth in the neighborhood. Anyway, go back over. Topic for tonight is online trajectories. A lot of us don't know what our fall semesters will look like. It might still be online. It might be face-to-face with social distancing. It might be who knows what. So we're going to hear from a few presenters about adapting our teaching strategies for online use, or for whatever our fall semesters end up looking like. PICUP does focus on computations. We are going to hear some about that, but we're also going to hear about adapting our labs and our interactive engagement for online teaching. So just as a reminder, if you're not engaged in the conversation, go ahead and mute yourself, just so we can most easily hear our speakers. Let me double check. I saw Ruth and I saw Ariel earlier. There he is. Haven't seen. Yeah, thanks. Looking to see if Rebecca Vieira has joined.
Yep, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, great. Rebecca, I've got you first on the list. Would you like to lead us off?
Sure. All right. Okay. Hello, everybody.
I did.
Sorry.
I did need to do one quick announcement, but before I introduce you, sorry, I got notes. I'm sharing the link to the PICUP virtual conference that'll be starting June 26th. PICUP actually just recently had to add a third session because there were so many abstracts submitted, so there's now for that. And there will be some of these focusing on teach online. We're all interested in now. It is free registration, and I've sent the link in the chat. Like I said, we're going to hear from 3 speakers tonight. We'll ask each of them to speak for about 15 minutes, followed by a few minutes of questions, and if time permits, we can have a little roundtable discussion afterwards. So without further ado, let's hear from Rebecca Vieira. She's one of the developers behind Physics Toolbox.
All right, good. Yeah, good evening, everybody. My husband, Christian, is also here. He can come on camera real quick just to say hello.
Yes, hello.
So some of you might be familiar with Physics Toolbox. There's a number of different resources out there for using smartphones in order to collect data, visualize data, and then also you can export data, of course, and do some different kinds of spreadsheet activities with it as well. So I was just going to take a few minutes to share with you kind of some of the opportunities that exist. I hope I don't overwhelm people, but I at least want to share with you possible resources, especially for the kinds of activities that you might want to have students do, at home, that are laboratory hands-on activities, in addition to, online kinds of things too. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, actually. See if I, Brian, can you give me, if you make me the host temporarily, I should be able to share my screen. Brian, are you able to hear me?
Sorry, yes. It just told me
There you
Rebecca's.
go. I got it. I got it. Awesome.
Now we're getting to everybody.
Okay. All right. Okay. Sorry about that. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to share with you tonight. The first one is just in general using smartphone sensors. And the second one is specifically something new that we're working on with some funding from the National Science Foundation. You know, you may or may not find computational elements with these things, but they're there. And if you have additional ideas, let me know. Just as a kind of resource, our website is www.verasoftware.net, and there's lots. Wow, there's a dog howling. I'm sorry. There's a whole bunch of resources on our website for ideas for lesson plans and lab type activities. We don't really have like curriculum, so to speak, or modules necessarily, but lots of ideas for inspiration. So there's two things, like I said, I wanted to share tonight. The first one is Physics Toolbox Sensor Suite, which is a free app, which is available for your Android phone or for your iPhone. They're almost identical, slightly different because of some differences between the way iOS and Android works. And then the second one is we have a standalone app called Magna AR, which is also part of the suite, but it's got totally different functionality, and it uses like, you know, augmented reality. And is only compatible with more modern phones. So just in terms of some of the things that you can do, your phone has got all these different kinds of sensors, microphone, obviously, light sensor, magnetometer. A lot of phones have barometric sensors, so all that kind of stuff. And so if we're thinking about like, what can we actually have students do at home? Here are some really practical examples. You can have students, and forgive me if I say kids, I was a high school physics teacher, so I always say kids instead of students, but this is just one example of doing inverse square law with a point source of light.
First, and it doesn't matter how they arrange the markers, as long as there's an even number of markers that we put down.
Sorry? I think somebody might have, okay. I don't know. But anyway, there's a whole bunch of great ideas that are very straightforward where you can derive basic physical principles. And I do want to point out Martin Monteiro from Uruguay, he's currently on. There are loads and loads of ideas that are explained beautifully in blog style that you can find at smarterphysics.blogspot.com. So I really encourage people to check that out. Another really simple principle, you can do inverse cube law with the magnetometer. So this is just a small magnet. So literally you need a tiny magnet, you need a phone with a magnetometer, and you might need a ruler or some kind of a measuring device. For light intensity, you literally just need a ruler. So it really doesn't get easier than that. And then your phone has all these audio capabilities too. And so this is taking a look at spectra. I guess you can do it quantitatively, but you know, qualitatively is almost just fine with this. We've got FFT, but you can also do a wave visualizer, like, you know, voice sounds, looking at amplitude and frequency and timbre and all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of things that your phone can do. Circular motion with a salad spinner, even things like having students hold phones to find out which way centripetal, you know, the centripetal force pushes or pulls, right? Just having kids get up and spin around can be really, really effective, you know, and things that they can do at home. Your phone also has the capability of being a generator too. So in this case, we've actually got phones where we've got the screen with monochromatic light, red, green, blue, and you can mix those just in a dark room. So I just hope that people think about their phones as really laboratories in their pocket that they can use. But there's a whole bunch of other cool stuff. This right here is just a quick video that shows how you can use even like a very small speaker. And this is just a plate of milk. And the phone is simply producing a very, very, very a high amplitude sound. And you can change the frequency and actually get patterns. Or in this case, you can actually get something called cooter bubbles or cooter, I'm not sure, cooter bubbles, sometimes I think they're called. You can see one in the milk here. So there's just some really cool experiences and phenomena that you can have using smartphones. We also have within the phone to introduce people to how to use their sensors. We have something called Physics Toolbox Play, which we actually developed for children between the ages of like 8 and 12 with their parents, just to introduce them to what is a barometer, what is an accelerometer, and they have to complete a variety of different challenges in order to advance to the next level. We've found it's extremely effective with adults as well. So if you're ever considering introducing your students to using your phone and the diversity of resources that it has to offer, that's one really fun kind of gamified way to do it. I do just want to say though, if you have people use smartphones for activities, encourage people to be cautious. This clip right here is actually a video of somebody sharing an experience with the Doppler effect. So they decided to put their phone and turn up the tone generator and to throw it. The video has a very nice recording of this. They used a second phone in order to record the change in frequency. But of course, this can break your phone, right? Or we had another scenario where we had somebody who wanted to take a look at impulse, and so they attached it to a volleyball and they bounced it around, threw it against the wall. You know, I don't know if I would recommend that to students. Let's see here. The other thing I wanted to share with you in the limited time that I have is something called Magna AR, which, like I said, it's a mode within Suite, but it's also standalone. It uses augmented reality, which uses the magnetometer, the accelerometer, and also the camera in order to get a three-dimensional sense of space. And it plots the magnetic field in the location where it's collecting the data. And so this is a resulting image that's just from a simple bar magnet, which I realize people might not have, but probably could get their hands on. Here's just a couple of other scenarios there where you can take a look at exploring magnetic fields. Almost everybody's got some kind of a speaker system, and it's really cool. I mean, the magnetic fields are really awesome to look at, and you can also get a readout of the actual strength of the magnetic field. The image here on the left, this was actually something I had made. It's a plastic ball, and I put magnets on the inside, so it basically made like a little micro planet. And you can actually see the magnetic field, which models the Earth's magnetic field. And so it gives students a sense of the fact that even though we say the magnetic field points north, depending upon where we are on the surface of the Earth, it actually is kind of bizarre, right? Because you've got the dip angle, which most people don't think about. So I think that's a great exploration, especially if any of you are teaching introductory kind of physics, might tie in some earth science or some kind of an astronomy stuff too. But I also remember even for advanced labs, having to find out what the Earth's dip angle was. And again, you can have students do, you know, some similar kinds of activities with their own smartphone. This, I believe, is a picture taken by Arturo Martí, also from Uruguay, showing the inclination of the Earth's magnetic field upwards, whereas in the northern hemisphere it points more downwards. So those are just a variety of different things. I want to share one last bit here. This is the blog that I had mentioned from Martín Montero, Arturo Martí, and a couple of Cecilias who collaborate together down in Uruguay. But I also wanted to just show you briefly the website that we have for our apps, because there's lots of great ideas you can get if you click on lessons. And these are not developed lessons. These are very much inspiration is what I would consider them. We do have some resources for some things, but if you just scroll through here, you'll see all the things that you can do with some guidance for how to do it. You can have students measure the heights of objects, right, using some trigonometry. That may not be quite physicsy, but it was the way that I prepared students to go to amusement parks. You could have them measure circumference of the Earth using inclinometer, do some studies on precision, gate patterns. So these are just a whole bunch of general science methods kinds of activities, but you can do quite a bit more. Measure acceleration due to gravity by gently dropping your phone onto your bed, for example. You can have them take a look at if they have access to an elevator, finding out displacement and velocity by looking at, you know, the integrals of acceleration time graphs, for example. So you can browse through this all at your own leisure, and I think you'll find something for almost every major, at least introductory physics topic, from pressure to electricity and magnetism, fluids, and a whole bunch more. So that's taken me about 11.5 minutes. I think the best thing for me to do would be just to stop at this point, take a breather, and see if people have any questions that I can answer.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Any questions for Rebecca? We got probably a few minutes for questions. Question in the chat. Wondering if you could post the URL. I don't know if that means the website for the app or maybe the slides you were sharing. But any URLs you care to share, we'd be happy to receive in the chat.
Hey, Rebecca, I have a quick question. Is there an instructor side of this for the app that instructors can see what students are doing, or can they, how do they, if we were to build an assignment with it, how would they be able to turn that in? Or is it just a measurement device that then they later have to transcribe?
That's a great question. Yeah, no, right now it's just a measurement device. And part of the reason for that is we collect zero data, and it also, the app doesn't, we did not want the app to be required to be connected to any kind of a network for privacy, but also because this is just kind of a hobby. So we do not have the capability of anything other than that. You can export all of the data that's collected. So there's two ways you can have students collect data though. The first way is to have them screen capture the data. So like if you wanted them to, you know, get acceleration due to gravity or something and demonstrate that they had done what they had said they had done, you can have them screen capture data. You can also have them export it as a CSV and then of course import it into an Excel and do whatever kind of analysis you'd want to do.
Hello, I had a question about the magnetic sensing.
Mm-hmm.
So for the determination of the inverse cube law, exactly where the sensor is pretty sensitive. Mm-hmm. So how do you figure out exactly where in the phone it is so that you can get the distances right?
So honestly, I think that, the easiest way to do this qualitatively is just to take a magnet and then to run it across the back of the phone and find out where you get the highest reading. That's the easiest way. The second way to do it is you can find out where the accelerometer is, because this is it's the same micro unit basically. And to find out where the accelerometer is, if you go to the website, if you actually take the phone and put it like on a record player, if people have record players, you can orient it in different ways and you can triangulate and find out exactly where the accelerometer is, and that's where the magnetometer is. Am I making sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you. That's very clever.
No worries.
I'll close out with one question. What's the training experience like for students? What kind of a learning curve do they seem to experience when they're doing this?
Yeah, you know, I guess it depends upon, so if you're all university instructors, so we did a workshop with undergraduates that lasted an hour and a half at PhysCon, which is all, so that's all undergraduate physics students. So we gave them an hour and a half. In that time, we had them do Physics Toolbox Play, the gamified version, and that only took them about 20 to 30 minutes. And that's not really technical. It's kind of constructed in a way that it's really about focusing on the phenomena and on the principles. But after that, we told them we wanted them to come up with the cleverest way to demonstrate a phenomena or a principle in physics. And within 30 minutes, kids had 5, 6 ideas. It was not a high learning curve, but at the same time, we weren't asking them to like export data. So if you're dealing with like majors, physics majors, I don't think you're going to have any issues at all, to be honest. If you're working more with maybe general education students who might have I don't know, maybe have a little bit less patience with the activities. I know that some faculty have done things like created little like YouTube video clips to say, and this is how you export the data, and here's how you import it into Excel. I would say using the app itself is not complicated, but sometimes knowing where the settings are in order to display a certain axis, sometimes people don't realize those things. So I would say it's a low bar, honestly.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you, Rebecca. We'll move on to our next speaker. If anyone else has questions for Rebecca, you can post this to the chat as well. Rebecca, could you either make me the host again, or
Yeah,
you can
sure.
or
There
you can make,
must be a better way to do this, but I haven't figured it out either.
Yeah.
So,
well, I got a reply from my technical support, Nick Nelson, and that was after I had made you the host. So
got
I'll
it.
come over.
Host, I'm happy to manage. I've been doing this a lot.
Yeah.
But actually, Brian, the way that you do this is if you click on the participant list, you can reclaim host. If you push that button, you can steal it back from me.
Okay, that's cool.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. All right. Let me see. All right. So that's participants. Nope, I am not seeing that option for whatever reason. Okay, it put me back on. Okay, so we'll move on to our next speaker, Ariel Paul from FET Sims. FET has certainly been very helpful to all of us in the spring semester, I'm sure. So Ariel's going to talk to us a little bit about kind of do a recap of what FET does and how we might use it in an online environment.
Hello, everybody. This is a little more manageable than earlier today. We were in a conference that had 3,000 people on Zoom, so I can actually see the entire participant list and handle the chat. And I'm excited to see that Zoom appears to have added, if you open the participant panel, yes, no options instead of just raising your hand. That's exciting for me. So have all of you heard about FET? That would be helpful if people could reply in that participant list, yes or no. If I have any no's, that'd be helpful. One of the things that came up a lot in the conference we did earlier today was a lot of technical questions. So if any question comes up, just pop it in the chat. I'll monitor that, or raise your hand, or we'll figure it out. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And we'll run through a number of things. Actually, I guess that becomes difficult. If you have a question, just unmute. There's enough people here, and we'll just discuss. So it looked like most people have heard about FET. One of the big questions that will tend to come up are some technical ones, so we'll get to that. But especially if you're sort of refamiliarizing yourself with FET, these days we have well over 150 simulations, 83 are in HTML5. So our HTML5 sims are a lot of what I'll focus on talking about today, because those are going to be the best that if you want to use them with students, they are going to be the most seamless to use with students. Now we have physics, chemistry, math, biology, earth science, but we'll just focus on physics. And if you do have any second language learners or people who are less familiar with English, these are translatable. If you have students who have some access issues in terms of bandwidth online, all of our sims will also run offline, especially our HTML5 ones. Those can be downloaded seamless. Obviously, with COVID, we have done several things on our website to help support remote teaching, and I'll show a bit more about that. But there have been a couple of quick changes very recently to help support the needs of teachers. So several things we've done. We've allowed teachers to share Google Docs on our website as lessons. We've introduced a remote learning tag for lessons. So those are lessons that are compatible with students using them remotely. And we've also, a big piece, which will hopefully get lots of you excited, is we have a stopgap solution for all of these lovely Java sims that you can't really use easily with students. So just, if you're not as familiar for the breakdown, if you're looking on our website, anything that has this HTML5 tag, those are HTML5 sims. They'll open in any modern web browser. They'll even open on phones. So there should be basically no barrier to access. These are great for you using as the teacher as a demo or sending out to your students as part of an activity. We do still have lots of sims, especially in physics. About half of them are still in Java, and that's pretty bad to give to a student. In general, you wouldn't want to do that anymore. They've become very difficult to run for most people, but they may still be quite useful to you as a demo or as a screencast. But we do have a neat alternative, which I'll point out in a moment. We also do have a certain number still in Flash. Those will run on most computers if you enable it. As most of you may know, Flash is sundowning at the end of 2020. So we're looking into ways to also stopgap solution that. So kind of a big announcement I'll show you is we have invested in this stopgap solution where we have, I'd say the majority of our Java sims right now, you can run directly in the browser. One click, they'll open. And so I will show you what that's about. So if we go to, on our website, for instance, here's a Java sim. If you see under that, it'll say, see if there's a browser compatible version. Right now, this is just as a Google Doc. We will eventually be integrating this into our website, but this was the fastest way for us to do it. So let me give you an example of one of our very popular ones in physics, photoelectric effect. So you notice I just clicked that. That's in my browser. I'm in Chrome, and this is the photoelectric effect running pretty well just in Java. Sorry, just in the browser. No need to have installed Java. It's one click. It just opens. So let me pause there because this was a big deal. Lots of questions about it. So does anyone have questions about what I just showed you? I went over that fairly quickly. This was a big technical question that had come up for lots of people.
You said browser. Is that platform-specific browser, or are we talking like HTML5 type accessibility?
So if you go into this Google Doc, which it can be linked from our website, you'll see it either on the front page, there's this browser compatible sims, or on any Java sim page, there will be a link to that document. So in the document, we have sort of caveats where we'll say, you know, this isn't supported yet, or, you know, not supported on an iPad. For one reason or another, the technology is not working great there. But basically, Chrome, Safari, these should open. Does that answer your question? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions on that? So what I'll say is, one caveat is, I mean, this will be a bit platform specific. If you have an older, slower device, it may not run well, but overall, it's a good stopgap. It at least allows you to run these Java sims in the browser, one click, no Java installed. Anything else on that?
I would say that one thing that's very useful is Moving Man, and I see that Moving Man is listed.
It is listed.
And I'm very happy to see that.
Yeah, it'll open right there for you in the browser. One click.
Biggest problem I've had with that is students who have Macintosh computers.
Right. and this will open just fine on a Mac. Now, if they have an older Mac, it may run a little slow. The performance won't be as good as our HTML5 sims, but it will run and open. Anything else on that? All right, let us move on. So one of the other things we've done, and you'll see more of this, is usually before we release a simulation, if you will, to the public, we want to make sure that it's going to run perfectly, no bugs on everything in HTML5. But due to the current conditions, we're putting out some things early. When they're basically feature complete, they're in a bit of a beta phase, but we want to get them out there to people. So especially in physics, I know Circuit Construction Kit's by far our most popular simulation. People have been aching for the AC version. There is now a prototype version of that up on our website in HTML5. Same with the full energy skate park. So if you're trying to use an adjustable reference height, that has that included. Our density sims also there. So if you're looking for those, again, right on our website, if you just click on HTML5 prototypes, that'll take you to these prototypes we have in HTML5. Any questions on that? Saw a question up in the chat. So I was asked, are there any platforms, apps that enable and encourage students to interact, work in teams in order to implement their respective learning goals, laboratory experiments? You can do breakout rooms in Zoom. So you can have the students, for instance, in pairs or maybe in triples or smaller groups, work on the simulation and share screen sharing between each other. So that has been an effective method people have been using to do collaborative work between students. So basically one person's driving the simulation. Does that answer your question, Wolfram?
And not quite, because that isn't really something that the students who don't choose online, like the students we had last semester, before we had to distance, that didn't really, because that's only the end of the experiment usually when they get together to work with the numbers or the measurements. But doing something together on the apparatus, that's actually more my question. Or on the experiment by doing it, like having somebody be in charge of making sure that the alignments are in place and all these things, or that, you know, quality assurance exercises, all these things that you would do in a workplace like we do in the lab, in the real lab.
So, you know, PhET simulations, these are really more conceptually based. We'll talk about that in a moment. They're not really, there's nothing on here that's going to allow students to do exactly what you're talking about. They're not great for supporting that learning goal.
Right, so then this is not just another lecture as a concept. And so, you know, some of us still try to implement the skills, including collaboration and all the soft skills that come with it in the laboratory experiments. So maybe this is going to go away. On the other hand, I think if we find out how to do this online, because it's going to be the future for the students, to actually work on things together.
Right, and I think you can do
not
that.
Just the numbers, not just the numbers, but physically, like they do in video games.
So there's not a way for two students to drive a sim, the same simulation at once right now. But like I said, you could have one of them do part of it, then screen share to the other one and them do part of it. I mean, you have to get a little creative there, but within our simulations, there's not the way to do that right now.
Right, and so I'm glad we pointed that out, and maybe this is going to be then a cue for, you know, PhET to maybe work the future.
It is something we'd love to do. We're a nonprofit organization. When the NSF funds us to do it, we'll be happy to do it. But yes,
maybe you can motivate the video game industry because they can do something more meaningful, perhaps.
I'll add that Zoom lets you share control of your screen as well. So that's something you can have students, one of them opens it and then they can share control of the mouse cursor and have somebody else work. I mean, you know, there are some other ways to implement that.
Yes, I'd be doing all that. No, I understand this is, you know, but it's all very limited when you do it. Yeah, and there is actually, when you look at what, you know, the video gamers are able to do, you would like to have this available for the education community as well.
Yes,
if that doesn't do it, nobody else will do it because that's the only player at this point.
Yeah, I 100% agree, but that's just beyond the scope of what we're discussing right now. So moving on.
No, I understand. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, no.
Right.
Moving on. So for some of you who may not be as familiar, if you move on to one of our simulation pages, in fact, let's do a circuit instruction kit, and you click under for teachers, there are going to be a few things there for you. Especially if you're refamiliarizing yourself with some PhET sims that maybe you've been doing an actual lab for. There are some tips for teachers. That's a document with some hints of how the simulation runs. There's a video primer that's a walkthrough of the simulation. And we also have labs that you can sort these days by type. So right now the top type is remote learning. We've done that specifically to help support the current conditions. And I'm probably getting pretty short on time, Brian. You want to tell me where I'm at?
Let's see. Yeah, we've probably got about, let's say, 2 or 3 more minutes to go.
Okay, so I'll just do a quick lightning round of a few things. So for our HTML5 sims, those are the ones, especially if you're assigning to students, that's all we'd really recommend doing in general. It's very easy to provide a link to the simulation. That'll take them directly to it. If you have various online learning management systems, it's very easy to embed those in the various systems. One thing we highly recommend, if you're going to assign the students for more of an interactive experience and use the simulation with an activity, start with an open exploratory question and have them just play with the sim for a few minutes, just like they could play with lab equipment and familiarize themselves. The nice thing here is they can't break anything. We often also suggest using challenge type prompts instead of specific instructions. Instead of telling someone, oh, set the cannon to this angle, fire at this speed, maybe say something like, what are all the ways to affect projectile distance in our projectile motion simulation? A few other things, and I sent the link to this talk, so all these links are in there. We have a nice feature on our HTML5 sims where you can give links to specific screens. So you can use this query parameter, and there's a whole video tutorial on how to do this. So you can just give students specific screens if you want to scaffold more. We often suggest using screenshots of the simulation for, well, here would be your experimental setup that we might want you to use. Those can also be used nicely for questions. We also often recommend in activities, if you're giving activities to your students, tables can be a really useful way of scaffolding and suggesting actions to the student, but still allowing them to maintain student agency. We have a whole number of general remote learning resources and tips available on our website, as well as teacher guides and pedagogical tips. And in terms of collecting student work and thinking, what we've seen a lot of people do, just like people were asking, well, how would you collect this data from the tools Rebecca was showing? Oftentimes people take snapshots, screen capture snapshots of the simulation, or you can have them take data, you know, if you're using our pendulum lab simulation or mass and spring simulation, you can take quantitative data. So I will end there and just point out there's our website. You can find lots of materials there. We encourage you, if you write a great lesson, to upload it to our website, especially now that we have the ability to have Google Docs there. And definitely feel free to follow us on Twitter. We answer a lot of questions there. So I'll end there for the moment, if there are any other questions.
All right, thank you, Ariel. Maybe in the interest of time, if anybody else has questions for Ariel, maybe post those into the chat, and we'll move on to our last speaker for the evening. Ruth Shavai in this community is probably most well known for her involvement with Matter and Interactions and Python, and she's going to talk to us about ways we might do coding in our classes in a distance environment.
Yeah, so hi. I'm going to do something a little bit different and talk about some experiences we had last semester and last year, in fact, that sort of suggest, if nothing else, a trajectory for working on teaching students to code and construct computational models online. The context is indeed the introductory course, and we are using Matter and Interactions. And what I want to show you, and then I hope you'll have some input, some suggestions, is a set of tutorials, activities framed as tutorials that we used for all of our labs in both mechanics and E&M, the computational labs in mechanics and E&M for the past year. Some of these things we had actually developed as pre-labs that students would do at home, just largely motivated by the observation that although students did learn some computational things in this course, it was mostly an introductory physics course, and computation wasn't the only thing they were doing. And the students who had more computational background were more comfortable, so we wanted to give students a chance to learn some things quietly on their own in their own time at home before coming to lab and doing other activities. And so we called those pre-labs, and those then segued into similarly framed activities that were somewhat more challenging, that were actually done in an ordinary, up until the middle of last semester, done in an ordinary lab setting where students worked next to other students and interacted with TAs. And I'll talk a little bit about how I think that went when we had to switch to doing completely online. So I will share my screen and show you an example of what we were doing. The platform we're using here is Trinket. So we're using VPython, but as GlowScript VPython, because our students are, 60 introductory students are not going to be able to install real Python. Let me pull up the chat window here just in case you have questions in chat, although you feel free to unmute yourself. So one of the things we wanted to do is just give students a chance to do some computational things at home. So you can view Trinket as the introductory physics version of a Jupyter notebook, basically. You can write in Markdown, you can intersperse code and text, and you can run and interact with code. So here's this is the very introductory activity that students did at home after the first lecture, which said you're going to be doing some computation and here's how. And you can look at the code, you can run it, you can interact with it, you can zoom inside the box and whatever. And there are various things that you can do. A brief introduction here. This was a very lighthearted introduction to sort of make students think it wasn't scary. And then you can also have actual assignments where students have to write something of their own and turn it in. And there's actually a very nice way of grading what students have turned in with a dashboard. So you can look at what students have done, run their program, comment on it, and give it, send it back to the students. So we did a number of these things during the year. There were several pre-labs that led directly into laboratory assignments. So for example, a pre-lab a little farther along, and again, this is the first semester mechanics course, was just an exercise, an assignment that taught students. By now they could write loops and they could use velocity to animate motion. And this taught them to make graphs and to use graphs. The goal was to be able to use graphs as tools in solving basic physics problems involving velocity at this stage of the course. So there was a review where students had to look at their previous work and write a program where there are two birds flying with different velocities, and the question is the falcon going to catch the starling which is flying away from it? And then the students had to write code to animate this, and then we taught them how to make graphs, and then they basically had to solve a problem, make a graph that related to the falcon and the starling. So since this is a 1D motion, graph X versus T for both birds and see if the falcon ever caught up with the starling, which is not always that easy to tell if you're actually just looking at the animation in your, and then turn in that assignment. And we often had optional challenge programs. And we can again see what the students did. So here's the, unfortunately, Trinket by default has a really wimpy little screen, although you can blow it up, but you can see from the students' graph, they barely got caught. And then that was a segue into a later assignment where the students did a motion lab. First, just with spiders going up and down spider webs. So there was a program that they had seen in class that they had. So at this point, we're doing a lot of reading of code and not as much writing of code. So we have spiders going down spider webs at constant velocities, but they're different. And the question is, will they reach the ground at the same time or not? And then the students had different tasks to make the spiders go up instead of down and things like that, or going up for different directions. And so the goal was to have them do some work at home for two reasons. One, to learn some skills that they were going to need in a bigger assignment. Two, to refresh in their heads what they'd done before they come to the next class, so they remember a little bit about so this is, your questions are about Python 2.7. And the answer is that this is GlowScript. We're using GlowScript Python, so GlowScript v Python, not pure Python. And I don't know what the pricing issue is for Python on Trinket, but GlowScript is free. The Python is not based in Python 2.7. GlowScript v Python does, in fact, support Python 3 syntax. But for those of you who don't know, what GlowScript v Python is not pure Python. It uses a transpiler called RapidScript to take Python code and actually translate it to JavaScript code, which runs very fast natively in the browser. It is not, it's very close to what happens with Python. Its performance is very close to that of Python, except it's a lot faster because JavaScript is fast. And it's not exactly the same in all details, and the dividing by zero may give you a slightly different performance. And the reason it's fast is that it doesn't check all that stuff. but it's very close to Python. If you're doing very sophisticated computation, where you're going to have to bring in lots of Python libraries from the ecology, you don't want to do this. But for an intro situation where in fact students are mostly just writing simple code, but really want to be able to use vectors and do 3D graphics, this is actually a reasonable, a very good environment. That means that they also don't have to do anything. This culminated in so by the end of last semester, we suddenly, so there was a lot of interaction with TAs. Students were getting help debugging and whatnot and talking to other students. So we really weren't sure what was going to happen when we had to go all online. And okay, I'll answer that next question in a minute. So we finally ended up with an assignment leading up to it. The students had to model a cyclotron and find out how much energy a proton had gained starting from rest in a cyclotron, and given, and then experiment to see what happened if they got the cyclotron frequency wrong. And so their program ended up being something like, oops, well, that's maybe bigger than I need to make this. Let's not make it full screen. So their simulation looked something like this. And there's a graph of energy versus time. Of course, the proton's getting a kick when it crosses the graph. So they got pretty sophisticated over the course of a couple semesters. What we ended up doing, and I don't know, we had enough experience with the students and they had enough experience that we ended up actually letting them do the labs on their own time, but having the TAs have Zoom office hours during the scheduled lab times when we had to go online so that the students could come in and ask questions. I was also available by Zoom chat for students who couldn't make it to the labs or who had other questions. And this worked out okay. Almost everybody got this done, and the assessment, the lab practical assessment at the end of the semester, almost everybody could actually do things that were kind of based on what they'd done in these final labs here. Okay, they are not publicly available because they are very matter and interaction specific. And so I'm not trying to sell you a product. I'm actually talking about an approach. If you're using matter and interactions, then we are trying to make these available, but they're very much couched in matter and interactions terms. So I don't think they'd be terribly useful to other people.
You should say something about the copying problem.
Oh, there's also it's also just, we've been trying to get the people running Trinket to make it easier to copy these courses. And as you saw, and the last question pertains to this, there's a billion different labs and different courses here. I have each lab and each pre-lab set up as a separate Trinket course. This is really essential because the students, what we do is put a link in Canvas to that particular, the URL of that particular Trinket lab. Otherwise, the students have as much trouble navigating the increasing list of Trinket activities they have as I do. And it makes it possible to go step through the dashboard and grade and give comments on problems. In fact, you can see that I actually have, for the labs, I actually have different labs for each labs, different courses for each lab section, which is a pain to set up, but actually works well in terms of grading and recording grades. Yeah, well, if you're an M&I user, the there's a new Slack workspace for M&I users. So we hope you'll join that, and we're happy to talk with you in there by email about this approach. My question's about how this, so this worked okay, but the students had some in-person experience with TAs hovering over their shoulders. And I had well-prepared TAs. But I don't know how this model will work in the fall, and I will be online in the fall. Our university has decided that all large lecture courses are online, and in our labs, there's no way we could actually do labs and maintain social distancing because we have an infinitesimal lab room for this course. We have 20 people crammed in so close that they're touching shoulders. So in fact, we will be doing this online in the fall, and it's an interesting question. What we'll be able to pull off. I think probably some of the materials will have to be redone with more support built in, more reading code and less sort of steps on your own. But these things did work fairly well, and we did see students in the lab referring back to pre-labs to learn how to do things, or referring back to previous assignments to learn how to do things. So I think it's at least promising. The real issue is of course answering individual questions and helping students debug problems. Sometimes it takes, as you know, sometimes it just takes a minute to see what a student's done wrong in their code. And more eyes are useful, and without the students helping each other, this will be interesting. I'm not sure how to organize groups that'll actually really facilitate having students working together on some of these things.
You want to stop sharing so they can see?
Yeah, so they can see me.
Okay.
So that's what I've got, but I'm interested in your experiences and suggestions for how to do this completely online.
All right, thank you, Ruth. So we've got time for a couple of questions or feedback for Ruth.
Yeah, I've had mixed experience with Zoom breakout rooms. I tried using those in our recitations, and they wouldn't talk. So I think the key was that they have to be really prepared. They have to come with questions or come having understood a task and wrap their heads around it and being prepared to discuss. They would spend all their time reading things and trying to figure it out. So I think setting up breakout rooms, I mean, in principle, I think it's a great idea, but I think that I at least will have to devote a lot more effort to getting them to do some preparation beforehand so that they have something that they can immediately talk about in a breakout room.
But you did get chat questions in your lectures quite a lot.
Yeah.
So this is less of a question and more of a comment on the breakout rooms and the interaction. I tried this my very last week of classes where I forced students to have their cameras on. I informed them that I was going to be requiring them to have their cameras on, and so they could, like, be prepared for it. And about 90% of them did, and that actually dramatically increased student interaction. There's something about visually seeing other people that makes you think, and knowing other people can see you, that makes you think you are actually interacting with other people. But anyway, just a comment. And that has all sorts of problematic things about students, and some students don't have webcams, and some students are not necessarily in a conducive environment that may be distracting or whatever. But just a comment on sort of encouraging interaction.
Yeah, that's a great comment, and I think you're probably right. I didn't feel I could do that last semester just because we didn't have that, but I actually plan to require webcams this coming semester. I'm allowed to require webcams and respond to lockdown browser for tests and whatnot. And I think just telling them up front, you have to have one, and forcing them also to come to a 15-minute office hour with me during the first 2 weeks. I'm going to somehow talk to 60 students during the first 2 weeks, but you know, encourage the norm of you've got to have a webcam and you have to be using. I agree that I think that might really help.
I've seen a lot of folks also focus their first, maybe even first week or week and a half on asking the students low stakes questions, questions about themselves, their lives, their interests, et cetera, so that they're getting used to the technological environment and the kind of new social expectations there, but they're not having to learn any course content at the same time. And so, that's also an opportunity for them to, troubleshoot things like how to turn on their webcam and how to share their screen, et cetera.
Yeah, I had planned to sort of do something like that, but in the context of some, learning about vectors and learning about velocity and things like that. But yeah, I was going to give a dummy quiz which required using a webcam and using Respondus monitor and stuff, but also make the recitations require, use breakout groups and require students to have webcams on. Require as much as you can require, anything, but yeah, those are great ideas.
Do we have maybe one more question or feedback for Ruth?
Okay, well, for those of you who are commenting on M&I, if you'd like, I could certainly give you access to these Python trinket activities so you can take a look at them and see if you want to use them, and maybe we can work out a way that can make it possible to copy them easily.
Okay, great. Well, that brings us a few minutes past our advertised ending time. I want to thank Ruth, Rebecca, and Ariel for their time and for sharing with us. If anybody wants to hang around after I finish the recording and chat, share ideas, I'm happy to leave the chat room open. Nick, I don't think there's a problem with that. Okay, I'm getting a shake of the head from Nick. So yeah, if anybody wants to stick around, you're welcome to. Otherwise, we'll call this webinar to a close and wish everybody a restful evening.